Hi everyone, welcome to Reclaim Your Time Challenge. I am joined today by my friend and work and personal coach Jacqui.
Hi everyone, really pleased to be here today.
Jacqui and I have a long history, but Jacqui is a professional coach as well, and I can say how much Jacqui's coaching has helped me shifting my mindset, and my approach to work was not healthy. It was not in balance, and actually when I first met Jacqui, what she said to me, I don't know if you remember this, Jacqui, was I was talking about my frustration of working at home and taking work home on my days off, which many of you will relate to. And Jacqui turned around and said to me, well, who's asking you to do that? And you know when you have those light bulb moments and it was like, actually, nobody is asking me to do this. This is entirely my doing and it's my decision. And I think for me, this has been like a really important thread for PPA Buddy, that we talk about workload in teaching, Jacqui, and I'm sure you've seen in the news, you know, teachers strike often, and we talk about pay and we talk about workload levels. We feel it's something that we can't do anything about, and that we're waiting for, you know, policy change and a new government to change that for us. And the thing after we spoke was that I realised that there's things I can do every day that set some of those boundaries and stop me taking work home. So, Jacqui, I think it's probably best to hand over to you to introduce yourself, and just if you could explain a little bit about coaching and what a coach would do and how you've helped people, that would be fab.
Yeah, sure. So, the word coach, what does that mean? As a coach, I am basically a personal one-to-one coach, which I support people with anything they're finding challenging. And that can be things that are very personal, like confidence. It could be imposter syndrome in a job. It could be a transition that you're going through, such as returning from maternity leave or preparing for a maternity leave. You know, being made redundant, you know, something like that. Or it could be, you know, actually finding things challenging in the workplace. You know, wanting that promotion, maybe, you know, wanting to work on leadership skills, anything like that, or just when things are overwhelming and they are pressured. And I think a lot of what we're talking about today is probably along that kind of topic of boundaries. You know, what do people need to individually put in place so that they are feeling at their best and working at their best. And so I work with people to help them figure out those answers on their own, you know, asking them questions. I'm certainly not here to tell people what to do, give them advice, because everybody knows themselves the best. Everybody is their own expert, is how I like to think of it.
Yeah, and I think, you know, everything that you've just said are things that affect teachers, and I think it's quite a normal occurrence to have a coach in the commercial sector, but not so much in education. We have lots of training in CPD, but it's often about teaching and learning strategies, and how to improve our practice. But actually, when we consider how big a topic workload is in the education sector, I think this is like the perfect time to get us starting to think differently about, you know, going to see a coach or adopting some of those mindsets that we'll talk about a little bit, about how we can change our approach to managing our workload. So I'm so excited to have you here today, Jacqui. I think as like the first topic to get stuck into, I think it's quite a big one, but why do you think it's so hard for teachers to feel in control of their time?
That's a good one. So being in control of time, I suppose, you know, everything you've just set the context for, Claire, is that teaching is, you know, heavy workload, very fast paced. There isn't loads of time, you know, you're in lessons, you do have your time to do your planning, but quite often other things could be thrown in the mix during that time. So I think there are lots of things that are out of your control, but there are things that are also in your control. So I think it's just probably taking a step back and looking at that. I think one of the things that's on my mind is, you know, that a lot of how we work is to do with our personality traits and what drives us. And when I think of teachers, I think of people who, you know, want to help people learn. That's the fundamentals of it, isn't it? And people that might be attracted to the industry want to do good. They want to see that growth in people, which is an amazing traits to have. But it also can come with traits such as wanting to please people, wanting things to be perfect. And some of the things I'm referencing are to do with transactional analysis, which I don't know if we want to go into that now or not.
I think it would be good, because that's not a phrase that I'm used to hearing. Okay. So just explain to someone that might not know what that is. What are we talking about?
Okay, so in coaching, one of the things that we often look at is what is really driving us. So sometimes, we might be in a situation where we are working too hard, we're feeling overwhelmed, the job is too much, and it's about sometimes stepping back and saying, well, why am I working in that way? Yes, there is the busy workload, everything around us, but also, why am I saying yes to everything? Or why am I thinking I need to be busy all of the time? Or why does that presentation need to be absolutely perfect?
Yeah.
So the transactional theory is about, it's based on how we've been brought up as children, the messages that we've received as we've been growing up, whether that be about, you must get things right, or you must be perfect, or you must be busy and productive all the time, or is it about, pleasing everybody? So as children, we receive all these messages. It's things that we've observed in our parents. It's not about blaming our parents, by the way. But these things become part of our personality, part of our DNA. It becomes our default ways of working. So everything will be okay if I say yes and make that person happy, because that will make me feel okay. Or if I'm getting everything perfect, I will be pleased with myself. So and we haven't got ages to go into the theory. It'd be something really useful for you to look into, and maybe a bit more if you're interested. But it's about looking at what those things are that are driving us, and then being able to take a step back and say, is that always serving me well? So does it need to be perfect all the time? Do I need to be productive every single moment of the day, or do I need my downtime? Do I need to say yes to everything, pleasing others? Do I need to always say yes, or do we need to be a bit more measured about if I can take that on or not?
I think that makes a lot of sense for teachers, because understanding our why we're doing things, why we came into the profession, and actually what you said about saying yes and being a perfectionist and people pleasing. I do wonder sometimes when I look at colleagues that I work with and myself, whether it does attract those sorts of people to that profession. But that's not to say that we're trapped in that role, does it? And I think there's things that we can talk about there that help us shift our mindset on what we are doing and why. So I think it's important to talk about those boundaries at work. And we talk about setting boundaries at work, but how to do that without feeling guilty, because I think sometimes there's negative connotations, isn't there, to having clear boundaries as that worker that will push back a little bit. And I think sometimes we avoid even pushing back or creating boundaries because we don't want to appear to be the person that's saying no, or the person that's been a little bit obstructive. And these are, I'm purposely using negative words because I don't believe setting boundaries is negative. But how can we tackle that?
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting the language you're using there, Claire, because I don't see boundaries as a negative thing. Yeah. So I think it's probably first recognising that it doesn't have to be. There are ways of setting boundaries which it's not, about going around saying no. It's actually, I guess, most importantly about the boundaries we set with ourselves.
Tell me what you mean by that then. This is interesting.
Yeah, so to me, the word boundaries, I guess just to describe, I think that's about, what do I want to do and how do I want to do it, and what messages do I want to, give out, either directly or indirectly about that. For example, on my day off, I am not going to work. And you may need to say that at some point, but you may also want to just show that boundary by not checking your emails and not responding and not doing work, And so the boundary with yourself I think, is most of it in terms of sticking with what you want to do and how you want to work, you know, and not slipping into the habits of, oh, I'll just quickly do that because that person needs it. So for me, I think 90% of boundaries is our own personal boundaries. Is this making sense?
No, that makes perfect sense. And, you know, I think in terms of how we communicate those boundaries, I think you talked about, you know, having verbal cues, non-verbal cues. And I think, you know, for me, for instance, PPA time, planning, preparation and assessment time, which is never long enough, but it can often be seen, because it's on a timetable, as a chance to catch up with people, to just drop in unannounced, to maybe ask them for that thing that you need. And actually, if we're talking about, you know, creating a clear boundary and a better work-life balance, then it's about making the most of that PPA time. And I think for me, one of the big switches I made was having like the overhead earphones on. So you don't need overhead earphones. I've got some very nice in-ear ones, but actually there's something about that visual cue of when you come into a room, you see someone typing away and they've got some headphones on their head. It's quite an obvious interruption, isn't it, you're having to make to stop them, make sure that they can hear you. So although I'm not saying it as an avoidance tactic, to still communicate that, you know, that's got to be your deep work time, but I think then it's a bit of a cue for people to see, oh yeah, Claire, when she's got those on, she wants to just get stuck into what she's working on, I'll come back.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people respect that. And I think people do respect people who have boundaries and make those boundaries and are clear with them. So there's the danger, I think, of, you know, oh, it's all right, you can interrupt me. That sends out a message that Claire is okay to be interrupted.
Yeah.
That time is actually for anybody, it's not her time.
And I think that you said is really interesting, because I've certainly noticed that in the past in my career, that certain individuals can almost feel like they're getting an easy ride. They're not getting an easy ride, it's just they've communicated to their line manager what they are prepared to and not prepared to do, and when they're contactable and when they're not. And then you can see the same line manager will have another reportee that actually it seems like they're asking them to do a lot more, but perhaps they haven't set clear boundaries, or they've got that always on availability mentality. So I think if we can talk about that as well a little bit, because I think that's those practical steps teachers can take to communicate those boundaries effectively. What tips or what advice have you given clients in the past about what they can do?
I think I always encourage clients to think about what they personally need and what's reasonable, and not be apologetic in the way that's communicated. So I think the language that you're using, it doesn't need to be, don't contact me then. You know, it doesn't need to be negative. It can be just having a reasonable conversation about, you know, I have commitments at home, you know, that's my family time, this is when I'm going to be free. And
do you think sometimes we over-explain why we shouldn't be contacted? It's about a bit of a guilt thing. I don't want to say no, so I'll create this story. It's a genuine story, but I'll give lots of background information.
I think we do, and I don't think it's needed.
No.
I think it's a lot about confidence and actually believing in yourself in terms of what you need, what you can do, being reasonable.
Yeah.
You know, and if your line manager really, really needs to contact you on that time, that they will tell you.
Yeah.
You know, it's about kind of having that adult conversation, and not being difficult or awkward.
And I think that's the thing. I think sometimes we forget as well that our line managers are human and they understand it, and they're experiencing similar pressures. And I know I've been told that actually I use an out of office. I work 3 days a week, and I have a very clear out of office that says my working pattern is Wednesday to Friday. You can contact me in those times. Messages will be answered. If it's urgent, contact, and I'll put my line manager's name. And he said to me in the past, he said, you know, I sometimes forget, you know, it's a genuine sometimes forget that I'm not in work that day, and he sees my out of office and says, oh yeah, she's not going to get to that right away. So I think, you know, remembering that people aren't trying to pass off their workload or, be over controlling or micromanaging. Sometimes people genuinely just forget, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like the language that you were using there in your out of office. It was, it's just the information.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, there's no apology, sorry, I only work 3 days a week. No, you work 3 days a week and these are my 3 days.
I love that. Jacqui has this great phrase, and if you can share that, because for me, I used to do that. I only work. I'm only a 3-day week.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. I was just thinking about it actually, of when I first went back to work after having my first child, and I was working 3 days, and I remember saying to someone, I only work 3 days a week, and this person said back to me, don't use that word, don't use that language. You work 3 days a week. That's brilliant, and you're a mum. So that was such a powerful moment for me, that I've sort of maintained that ethos.
And they said to you, didn't they? You work 3 days a week. You're paid 3 days a week, and I think that's the thing that we forget.
I think we all need to remember that.
100%. I love that. I use that one. I've stolen that one from Jacqui. I use that one as well. I think, for me, my insight that I got, from working with you and starting to think about what my personal boundaries are, the thing that I realised was that if I continue to say yes to people, if I say yes, I can take that on, I'm ultimately saying no to something that I really want to do further down the line. So saying there's a compromise, isn't there? If you say yes and take that on, what am I willing to drop? And actually, if it's something that's really important to you, then I think for me it's easier to make that distinction as a business owner and a teacher now. It's like, well, if I keep saying yes to my teaching commitments, I'm compromising what I can do in my business life. So, but that could be interchange for my personal life. I'm saying no to my children. I'm saying I won't be there to tuck you into bed because I've just agreed to do this extra project at school. And that's not to guilt trip people, but I think sometimes we need to remember there is a trade-off, isn't there, to being a yes person.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's about remembering your values. Have you gone into teaching so you can have a good work-life balance and have time with your kids, for example? And actually, your example there would be misaligning that if you're missing bedtime or something. I think there are going to be times that you need to say no.
And that's okay, isn't it?
And that is okay. And actually, try it. Experiment, But equally, it might be, do you know what? I can't do that tonight. However, because I've got X, Y, and Z on, can we just have one more week, and I can probably fit that in at this time? So is it like,
I think that's really important.
A two-way conversation, adult to adult. What's reasonable? This is what I've got on. Maybe this could drop off the list. Yeah. This other thing that feels important.
And I think it goes back to understanding that your line manager is human as well, and that when someone makes a request, that's a conversation, isn't it? It's not that you must do this. It's okay to say, do you know what? I've got X, Y, and Z on this week. I can't help you this week. Next week I could get to it. Or saying, well, okay, that deadline isn't feasible for me. Can we talk about either lowering expectations or extending that deadline? I think you're going to be a lot more respected saying that, aren't you? And you're still not saying no.
Yeah.
You're being reasonable. And
absolutely. And I think in the long run, I think that's more helpful than missing the deadline or rushing it or something else dropping off the list, because your manager or whoever's asking understands a bit more about where you're at.
Yeah, and I think if we feel pressured into doing something, we're not going to give it our best focus and put all of our effort into it. We're going to have a little bit of resentment there, aren't we?
There is that too, absolutely. Begrudgingly saying yes to something and begrudgingly doing it. It's not helpful.
Getting it off your plate. Okay, so the next one is another key thing. It's like everyone's talking about how can teachers stop taking work home, and for me, I think this is doable. I think it really is. But what advice would you give to teachers who want to stop taking work home but they feel a little bit stuck?
Okay, I would probably ask them, what are their triggers for working at home if they don't want to be working at home?
Yeah.
So, is it seeing the laptop? Is it seeing the pile of marking to do? Is it simple as the physical removal of the thing which is triggering you?
Yeah.
Can you leave your laptop at home not at home, at school?
At school. You
in
can.
a locker? Yeah. And, could you have your work bag left somewhere else out of sight? so that you're not seeing it and triggering. Can you not have your work emails on your phone, for example, and maybe having a set time that you look at them. I think you do that, Claire, don't you?
Yeah, that's, for me, that was like a real game changer. It's like I communicate that I will look at my emails at 7 when I get into school, and then at 4 o'clock when I finish teaching, and they're the only two times. I think, again, I forget which book it was that I read, but there was this great tip which says, how many times we handle emails. You dip in while you're at your, in between cooking, and you're at home and you look at the emails and you've seen something, which, if it's a challenging email from a parent, that's going to ruin your mood at home as well. So you might not even want to look at it. But we kind of put it to the back of our mind, but we've not dealt with it. So it's about how many times we open up and look at those emails. So for me, limiting that to 2 times a day sends the signal that I'm not always available, that I've communicated when you will get a response from me. So people can either accept that or not, but there's no misunderstanding there. But also making sure that when I'm ready to do emails, I just do emails. I'm not checking it, on the way to pick the kids up. I will be ready to either action it or postpone it or delegate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So by that, it's not eating into your home time.
Yeah,
by
totally.
having your emails flashing up on your screen the whole time when you're at home.
Yeah, I think I might have hijacked what you were saying there a little bit, Jacqui.
No, not at all. Fine.
So in terms of, do you think then that not taking work home is more of a mindset shift, or it's more of a systems, like having efficiency systems or ways of tackling workload? Which do you think is the key thing there to stop that habit of coming home with work?
I think it's both, but I think it starts with mindset, because you need to have the mindset to then put your own system in place.
Yeah,
it's going to work for you.
So the mindset then, how can teachers start to shift that? And bear in mind, these teachers will be often outstanding, have worked for years in the education system. They've almost become used to that cycle of overwork. So how do you start to break down changing that sort of mindset on where they should work and how long they should be working for?
I mean, that's a big question.
It's huge. Just throw that one out there for you, Jacqui. We can fix the whole education system.
I think, when I work with clients on this kind of topic, I think it's starting small. What one change could I make today that would make that feel a bit better? So I think, you as individuals are all experts in how you work and what's right. And actually, it's probably just about thinking about, do I need to do that?
Yeah.
And just breaking it down and, is there a task I can remove to make life a bit easier, or not do that at home?
Yeah.
Is there a more efficient way?
And I love that, Jacqui, because that is what the daily challenge is for the Reclaim Your Time challenge is. It can feel insignificant, and actually if you look at them you might be quite cynical and say, well, actually, how's that going to make any sort of change to how I work? But it's that momentum, isn't it, of feeling that you've ticked something off. One small shift, like setting your finish time today to be 4:30, and then that's no more work. Or tomorrow, to see if you can delegate one thing or automate one task. And that was very much the same philosophy. It's like, okay, let's start to build a bit of a cycle of seeing some wins, really small actionable changes that you can just nail, tick off. And then that kind of snowballs, doesn't it? And starts to make you think about the bigger things we can start to tackle.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you're describing is building new habits, really, isn't it? And actually 100%. That doesn't just happen overnight.
Yeah.
We need to make small changes over time and keep them up.
Yeah.
Be consistent, hold your boundaries.
Yeah, definitely. Those kind of that consistency in how we do things is really important as well. And for me, that I've got a shutdown ritual as well, and I know you do a similar thing, Jacqui. And for me to kind of shift that, okay, telling my brain to start switching off and I'm going home to be with my family, I will write my most important task for the next day, so that helps me just get it out of my head so I don't start overthinking when I get home, and actually just clearing my desk. So the worst thing for me, and again this is a trigger for me, is to come in and see piles of marking or a list of loads of post-it notes with different things scattered on my desk. That straight away the next day will put me into that feeling of overwhelmed and that I've just got a mountain of work on top of me. So just shutting down just lets me help to go home, leave work at school, start the next phase of being with family, and not to have to carry those tasks with me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a very good ritual.
What's your ritual?
When I was in the workplace, which wasn't that long ago, so a couple of years ago, I would turn off my phone on the way home from London and sort of close down. That way, when I wasn't on my working days, I'd have my out of office like you were describing, and that was it then. It was time with my young children. And now I just have a ritual of, I have a physical place that I do my coaching, and that's where my stuff remains. And if I've, coached a client, I will write the notes, get it all down, close the book to that. It's all recorded, and then it's switch off. Close the door. I like to have that different place.
That's really important, isn't it? And I think because you're working from home, you've kind of got that clear distinction. You've got to be quite disciplined with that, haven't you? Closing the door, that's where work happens. This is where family happens.
Yeah.
I think sometimes when teachers lug that bag of marking in and it's sat in the kitchen, you're trying to get dinner, and every time you glance over that way, literally overflowing bags of marking, you can't ever shut off from that, can you?
Well, if you can try and have a designated place, or so that it's not in your sight all the time, or you have a designated time that you're going to look at it, I think you know that you're going to get to it, so you don't need to worry about it in your time when you want to be with your family and having your dinner and
shifting piles of paper.
Okay,
so this is a big one now, because I know I've spoken to colleagues and they're like, it's easier to say, it's easier said than done to actually manage expectations from leadership and line managers. So when those expectations come from a colleague that's a peer, I think that's the first step. You can practice those boundaries and it can be easier. But when it is, a head teacher, for instance, that says, Claire, I want you to do this. A lot of teachers feel like they can't say no to leadership, and I think that gives a whole other level of how do we respectfully but firmly manage those expectations. What advice would you give to somebody, or what advice? I'm sure this is similar in the coaching world, isn't it? And from people in the commercial sector have said, I can't say no to these people.
Well, you can.
How do you do it?
But it's difficult. When someone's more senior, it can feel intimidating, but they are just human. At the end of the day, you are both adults. I think it's about just having that conversation like you would with anybody else in terms of what you have on. Do we need to check that? What's happened?
I'm going to assume that it's still recording.
Yeah, it was.
It's recording.
It's recording. Okay, we can cut that out.
Phew. I think. What about? I'm going to play devil's advocate here, and I'm quite lucky because I have a great line manager who also happens to be the head teacher. But I know when I speak to friends that are in other schools, they don't necessarily. And actually, I've worked in places where I've not felt that I can be quite as open. What about, and I'm not saying this has been my experience, what about if you've got a head teacher that just doesn't get it? Say, for instance, you're a working mum. They might not have children. They might do, let's say, I'm painting this picture. I'm going to paint a really negative picture and try not to stereotype. But let's say head teacher doesn't have children, is really under pressure for improving standards in their school, wants all teachers, regardless of their home life, to be working all hours and be putting in like over and above, attending meetings last minute. How do you manage those conversations with somebody like that you are already feeling that they just do not understand your specific circumstances?
Well, that's a very challenging scenario. I wouldn't want to be in that school.
Yeah.
I think what you can do is communicate in a kind of fair adult to adult way on your boundaries. It's a little bit like what we were talking about earlier in terms of what you can't do, what's reasonable. If you go along, go around as a leader like that, everyone's going to burn out.
Yeah.
Right in front of your eyes. And if you were having that difficult scenario, you should have a line manager to also have to talk through these challenging conversations about how you would approach that.
And do you think that's where we come unstuck there, that we're not clear and we're not upfront with what our boundaries are to begin with? Do you think that just adds to the problem?
I think for all of us in the workplace, you know, if we are unclear, I think, you know, it's mixed messages, isn't it? You know, whereas if you are communicating and you're clear and, you know, this is what I can do for you, you know, I think it's easier to work with that person than not knowing. If they keep saying yes and they keep doing it, then I'm going to keep giving that work, it's fine.
I think you see that all the time, don't you, with people that kind of feel trapped in that cycle, and they always tend to be that go-to person for getting the job done. But that's great personal sacrifice, isn't it?
I think we've all been there. I know I have. So
100%.
It's always a work in progress. For all of us to remember to try and
I think it's 100%, and I hope that I'm not coming across as someone that knows it all and I've ticked all of the boxes, because I've made a lot of mistakes on this journey, but then there are lots of light bulb moments that I wish I'd have known, you know, like 20 years ago. And I think I started my career in, I know you were the same, in retail, and actually I went into that world so naively, and I think possibly some of this comes with age a little bit, but I wish someone would have told me that actually to communicate these boundaries and what boundaries are and how to manage workload, you know, with both systems and mindset. I lost my train of thought a little bit there. So in terms of managing workload when everything feels urgent, and I think this is something teachers relate to a lot, because there's lots of, like, we're dealing with people, there's always a last minute request that will come in, and it could be a safeguarding issue, it could be something that, you know, for us to manage everything else that's on our plate, when there's a never-ending to-do list, how do we manage our priorities better to tick off some of those things?
It can be really overwhelming, can't it? I think the key for me, and this is kind of how the coaching works, is just getting all those thoughts out. Because if we just got everything buzzing in our heads, it's just like, oh, it all feels urgent.
And you're going to drop something as well.
So, you know, different things work for different people. You know, writing lists can be helpful. I'm a big fan of the urgent, important matrix.
The Eisenhower matrix.
Yes.
Yeah.
So are things urgent and important? Are they urgent but not important? Are they... I can go on, but we can maybe share some more information on that. The safeguarding issue, of course, that's urgent and important. That's going to be top of the list. But there might be other things that are niggling you, but actually you don't need to do that till next month. You've got it on your list, you know that you can come back to it, or you can schedule to do it later. So I think it's about getting those thoughts out. Different things work for different people. I think you may have a really great colleague who you can just say, can I grab you for 5 minutes? I've got all of this on my list and I don't know where to start. And it can be helpful just talking out loud to someone.
Really helpful.
To help figuring it out.
And I think, you know, from what you've just said, I think it's important that someone else's urgent and important isn't necessarily your urgent and important. So I think, you know, making sure that we're aware of that it's what is important and urgent to us. Of course, as professionals, safeguarding might come from someone else, and that becomes our urgent and important. But there are many other tasks that aren't necessarily, it's someone else's deadline that's looming, and they may not have managed that well, and are then passing it on to you.
That's a really good point, which is never fun.
But I think it goes back to that clarity with communication, doesn't it, and setting that expectation early on. In terms of burnout then, which is another, like, we're all talking about burnout in the profession, and it's a really important one, because, you know, it's no surprise, we know from the media that there's a retention crisis and a recruitment crisis in teaching, and a lot of this comes down to workload, but also those unrealistic expectations. I know this isn't something that's just teaching specific, so how do you guide your clients to protect themselves against burnout? What would you say to someone who is recognising? Perhaps maybe we should start with, how do we recognise those signs of burnout? What might happen to us?
I think I would describe burnout as when you've had stress and like exhaustion continued for a long time, you can burn out.
Yeah.
And I think the signs are things like, well, exhaustion,
Yeah.
physical symptoms, emotional symptoms.
Yeah.
It's
So someone might become quite teary or quite sensitive.
Yeah, and it's not having that motivation.
Yeah.
You went into the field because you love it, and actually you've lost that sort of get up and go. There are so many different symptoms of burnout.
I know it's interrupted sleep as well, isn't there?
Like lots of things, and I think it's about recognising when something's off, so it could be different for different people, but it's starting to recognise those triggers before you've burnt out.
Yeah.
So it's actually, this isn't working well for me. I need to make a change. I need to listen to what my body's telling me, or what I'm feeling. If I'm feeling very emotional, that's not how I want to be every day in the workplace. That's not good for me.
Yeah.
So I think it's about looking after ourselves. It's about thinking about your well-being. Actually, has the exercise fallen off the list?
Yeah.
Do I need to put that back in?
And I think that brings me on to like planning moments of joy in your day, and that was part of the daily challenge as well, because I think it's important that we do take out moments to recharge. And again, I see so many colleagues that will have their lunch break at their desk in their classroom, and there's a barrage of students coming in, or someone else will pop in and catch up on a meeting that they want to have, and it's like, well, when do we take that time to just stretch, to go for a little walk, to eat your lunch in peace? And I think in some ways we've got to be as mindful of scheduling like the workout or the going for a walk or something as we are that to-do list on our Eisenhower matrix, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely, because you're not going to be at your best if you're not recharged. It's that you cannot pour from an empty cup.
Yeah.
I love that phrase. But it's so true.
Yeah.
You can't, if you're burnt out and exhausted, you're not going to be the best teacher.
Yeah.
But actually you need to have rest, you need to restore, you need to do what you need to do.
Yeah.
And I think, whether or not that's taking a moment to sit down and sort of, strip back what can go.
Yeah.
I think it's really important.
And where do I say, no work happens here at this time.
Yeah. This
is just about, going to the loo sometimes. I mean, we know
that is important.
We leave that to the last minute as well as teachers. So I think we talked about what those early warning signs are, and I think sometimes we think that it can be a quite a big obvious sign that we see in people, but it's not always, is it? I think sometimes just having your job not aligned with your values, it doesn't always have to be in a really high pressure, demanding job to feel burnt out. I think emotionally we can burn out, and I think as teachers, some of the things we deal with emotionally with these young people, we can also hold on to, can't we? And I think that must be something that you are familiar with as a coach, because personal issues might come up that can be quite traumatic or quite triggering. It's like, how do you separate yourself from those issues that could be quite hard emotionally to disconnect to?
Yeah, well, as a coach, I have supervision, which is about having someone to go to.
Yeah.
So it's 4 times a year, to say, this is really impacting me, why is that impacting me, and having someone to talk to about those things.
So the coach has a coach too.
Yeah, we have a coach. We have, it's part of being code of ethics, being professional. But I think it's learning the techniques to not be sort of thinking about yourself, and actually as a coach we are always just in service of the other person. In that moment. So as a teacher, I think it's probably about having similar techniques, in terms of leaving work with work, and I'm sure there are always times that things play on your mind, and that's human, isn't it?
It is.
But it's if you can have some techniques to let go and keep things separate.
And I think that's important, because we do have our designated safeguarding lead would be the first person to say, come and speak to us if there's something, that has been disclosed to you, they'll be aware of the situation, but to use them to actually decompress as well and talk through some of those things you might be affected by. And I think it's a good reminder at this point to say that we might not always take them up on that, but that is something they genuinely do talk about, and that mirrors what you're saying about, you know, you having your coach that you go to make sure that you let go of that, you don't hold on to it. Okay, so I think we're almost coming to the end of the questions that I wanted to cover for the Reclaim Your Time Challenge. As always, Jacqui, we could talk all day about these things, and it's a massive topic, isn't it? But I think the feeling drained, when you are stuck in that cycle of overwork, and we're starting to make some small changes, and we can see those glimmers, but just that general feeling of just feeling exhausted by that relentless job. How do you help teachers feel better about themselves? What small, like, impactful changes would you recommend to a client that's just feeling totally drained by what they're doing?
I guess it's looking at why you are feeling drained. It's going back to what we've discussed in terms of what's the root cause, what's, you know, what can I change, what's out of my control. Be kind to yourself, you know, it's about not putting too much pressure on yourself. And sometimes, for me, if you go into a bit more detail on that, so why do you feel drained, what are you thinking, it can be about thinking about what are we actually believing about ourselves. You know, are we putting on too much pressure? Are we thinking we're not doing a good job? You know, so sometimes it's looking at those beliefs and saying, do I really think I'm not doing a good job? I am doing an amazing job. And so it's like the reframing the thought process to feel like you're taking things a bit more lightly, maybe.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think sometimes we forget the impact that we're making. There's always more to do in teaching, but actually if you strip it back to the essence of why you are in there, and actually if you spoke to some students about what they love about your teaching, it's easy to forget they get so much out of it. And I saw this great tip that someone said, keep a positivity folder. So every time you get, like, set it up on your email desktop, a really nice email from a parent or from a student or from a colleague, or those shout outs when you do really well, put them all in one place. And when you are feeling like everything is weighing on you and you're questioning why you're still in the profession, to just go through those can be such a boost, can't it?
Absolutely. And I would also say, Claire, add your own. You know, in terms of what you're proud of. That can be really powerful.
I think that's a really nice one to move on to. So I've just started journaling, which I've never got on with journaling. I've always found that I waffle, takes too long, and then I stop doing it. So it's interesting talking about this when we are at that stage in January when most resolutions are dropped. But I think I saw this great tip that is just setting your timer for 5 minutes and every day having a morning kickstart. It was Dickie Bush, I think, if anyone wants to follow him. And it talks about one thing you're grateful for, one thing you're excited by, what's on the agenda for today, and what you need to do to make it happen. And actually, it's just one sentence. And I usually finish before the 5 minutes. And I am now on a 32-day streak of that.
Oh, wow.
This has never happened for me. I am not a journaler. And I feel like it's something that I'm going to continue with. And already I've flicked back to look at every day, what have I been grateful for? And it makes such a difference. It just makes you notice more positive things, doesn't it?
How does that make you feel, like, after you've done it? How does it sort of set you up for the day?
Oh, it puts me in the right frame of mind every day. I feel like I start the day thinking it's going to be a good day, rather than replaying something from the day before. That, let's be honest, we all do this. We might have one bad experience with a student in a 6-period day of, you know, otherwise amazing experiences, and we hold on to that one negative experience. It's just our human nature, isn't it?
I think it is, absolutely. And, you know, that example you've given of journaling is great. It could also be like a conversation, couldn't it? Like, you know, with your family, like going around, hearing from everyone. You know, it could be, if you're more of a verbal person, you could do that.
Yeah, I love that. I know you do that, don't you?
Sometimes. Best practice. Try to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think and it's a really nice one to model, isn't it, to kids, whether they're kids you teach or your own children, to just shift that mindset from focus on things that have gone wrong to, you know, either starting or finishing your day with something positive. Again, small change but big difference.
Yeah, like that.
Okay, Jacqui, I've loved our conversation. I feel like I could stay talking to you all day. If there was one thing that you want people to remember to take away from this conversation, what would it be?
Oh, there's so much.
Oh no, I'm sorry, that's mean, isn't it?
Do I have to have one?
Or two.
I would say, like, you cannot pour from an empty cup.
Yeah.
Look after yourselves. You know, it's important.
And I think it's those small, for me, it's like, don't underestimate those really small habit changes, you know, because they, just like we were saying about the positivity, if you force yourself to do one tiny positive thing, then you find it easier to tackle the bigger things. So once you start to win and see momentum, then it's easier to tackle maybe just one day a week you leave your laptop at home. Or maybe you just start by only giving yourself 30 minutes this Sunday to work, and then maybe next Sunday you give yourself 10 minutes, and the following one you fill it with something joyful and you don't do any work.
Love that.
So yeah, I'm realistic enough to know that change can't happen overnight. But Jacqui, honestly, thank you so much for joining us. I think everyone's going to take a lot from this, and remember there's the daily challenges on PPA Buddy that you can check into to start that winning formula, and it's not about perfection. I think that's what I want people to take away. Just progress can be messy at the start, and I think don't expect everything to change overnight, but just recognise those really small habits have changed. If people wanted to contact you, Jacqui, or wanted to find out a little bit more about how they could work with you, where can they go?
So thank you for having me, by the way. It's been great.
Pleasure.
So I'm on Instagram, probably linked to this. I'm on LinkedIn, and I've got a website as well, jacquelinepet.com. So yeah, get in touch if you want to have any more info.
Fantastic. Good luck with making those meaningful changes. Thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you, Jacqui.
Thank you. Thanks so much.